My brother is a somnambulist. I found a human head on our table after his latest sleepwalking event. By author Weird Price Guy. My brother is a sleepwalker. I live with him in an apartment, his room on the opposite wall of mine, and once or twice a week I can hear him getting out of bed and stumbling around. Some nights he'll stay in his room, others he'll venture out into the apartment. I've tried blocking his door with the chair, but he simply brute forced it open, destroying the chair in the process. Since then, I've allowed him to roam freely, not wanting to get a fist in the face for my efforts. He's never done anything dangerous and seems to mostly just shamble around, muttering to himself until he returns to bed or rests on the couch in the living room. His behavior started up suddenly a month ago and seemingly without cause, and when I've spoken to him about it, he doesn't find it worrying. Neither did I, until the night he left the apartment and returned with a human head. It was about 2 a.m. when I was awoken by the sound of his door opening, the hinges in desperate need of oiling. The only real downside to his sleepwalking is that if I'm awakened by it, I can't go back to sleep. My mind simply won't allow me to knock back out, not for a few hours, at least. I heard him perform the familiar ritual of stumbling around, softly bumping into things, mumbling incoherently, and gently touching random objects throughout the apartment. I'd grown so accustomed to this behavior that I no longer bothered to listen for signs of things being broken or him falling or anything of that nature. I grabbed my phone and browsed the dating app for a while, and at some point, I'm unable to specify, my brain did me the favor of letting me return to sleep. I woke up later in the morning around the time that I usually awake and became immediately aware of the absence of a certain ambiance within the apartment. Typically, my brother would emerge from his sleepwalking earlier than I rose from normal sleep and would spend the head start cleaning up any mess he had made earlier in the night. Once done, he'd usually make breakfast, as a sort of apology for any mess he might have caused. I'd hear the shifting of pots, the sound of sizzling bacon or eggs, and would smell the accompanying smells as I'd rest and prepared for the day. But this morning, I heard none of that, and the only noticeable smell was a sort of sickly sweet one, like the dumpster into which all the apartment's trash is deposited at the end of the day. I got dressed and left my room. There's a short hallway which leads from my room and also into my brother's room to the living room, which is connected to the kitchen by a small partitioning wall. We aren't exactly the most design-oriented people, so the few decorations we have upon the walls and shelves of the apartment are mainly pictures of family and any sentimental or comical items we'd gathered throughout our lives. A few pictures which lined the hall hung astray, each crooked, though none were shattered or otherwise damaged. I thought it was odd. My brother didn't often stumble through the halls so haphazardly. It was as if his sleepwalking self paid special care around the pictures. Moving past these, I came into the living room where I saw my brother sitting on the couch staring at an object on the coffee table covered by a cloth. Glancing to my right, I saw the kitchen untouched. Not a single thing cooking. Looking back to my brother, I noticed that he hadn't composed himself from the night before. He still wore his bedtime clothes, his hair hadn't been combed, and I at first thought the odd scent I smelled earlier came from him. But he was awake. That much was obvious. When he sleepwalked, he muttered incessantly and would only sit still if he were preparing to return to restful sleep. I asked if he was alright, and he responded by waving a hand towards the covered object on the table. I asked what it was, and he just laughed. A hollow sound devoid of any actual mirth. I approached, thinking it to be some object he had broken in his walks, but couldn't remember anything in our apartment worth enough to be so clearly distraught over. The most expensive thing we jointly owned was a game console, and that was safely tucked away on a shelf in the entertainment stand nearby. I reached the table, took a breath of anticipation, involuntarily not out of theatrics, and lifted the cloth. I couldn't have expected what I saw. A human head sat on the table, eyes wide, mouth agape, nostrils flared, an expression of total shock. The head was clearly female, the golden blonde hair secured tightly in a ponytail. I'd put her age at around 20, and remember thinking that she would have been fairly attractive if her face hadn't been splattered with blood and if it, of course, had been attached to a body. The face stared ahead, level with my knees on the low table. I looked at my brother, who again laughed darkly at the reveal of the gruesome object. I dropped the cloth on the floor, would have picked it up again and thrown it on the head, but I was so petrified by shock that I just stood there, my eyes darting back and forth from my brother to the woman's face. I asked several questions then, shouted them actually, and my brother responded to each one with a sort of sardonic chuckle, never actually answering any of them. Panic set in, and my mind immediately went to the obvious conclusion that my brother had, in his sleepwalking, gone out and murdered some poor woman, then brought her head back to the apartment. Naturally, I was disgusted, but that inherent family desire to protect those that I love prevented me from immediately calling the police. I began asking more questions, trying to ascertain where he had gone, if anyone had seen him, and who the woman was. All but saying that we needed to know whether or not the murder could be covered up, if it could be traced back to him. He was a bit more forthcoming with answers this time around and explained generally that he'd woken up on the couch, a bit later than usual, and found the head on the table. He had no idea who she was, nor if he had left the apartment at some point. This was troubling, and not at all reassuring in regards to whether or not anyone could have spotted him committing the act. The thought that the police could be speeding towards the apartment, fingers itching to pull the triggers of their guns and blast away my brother for his heinous deed, it scared the hell out of me. Honestly, more than the thought that he was some sort of murderer. While awake, he was an averagely nice guy, and even while sleepwalking, he would often politely apologize if he bumped into an inanimate object. I couldn't imagine him committing such a grisly act or staying in that subconscious state while carrying it out. Despite the uncertainty regarding his possibly imminent apprehension, I tried to assure him that things would be alright. This effort seemed pointless, however, because he hadn't really looked too worried. Despite his inability to provide information about the murder, he didn't seem much troubled by the fact that he had done it. This worried me in a new way, the possibility that my brother had become mentally unhinged, and that this murderous quote-unquote acting out was the beginning of some serial behavior. I began pacing around the room, then, in a moment of clarity, turned on the TV and changed it to the local news. I watched intently, but after half an hour, during which my brother didn't move from his seat on the couch, I saw no mention of a missing girl, nor of a decapitated body found somewhere. While not indicative that he had escaped notice, it was at least comforting to know that no active manhunt had yet been declared. No grisly crime reported. The initial shock of the sight having subsided, I quickly covered the head and carried it to the bathroom, where I placed it in the sink. I gathered some cleaning supplies there and went back into the living room, where I cleaned the spot on the table where the head had sat. My brother watched me do this with an expression that seemed like amusement. I ignored this, not wanting to have the conversation that might reveal him to be some newly psychotic individual. Even so, as I moved about, I offered calming affirmations, mostly for my own mental well-being. Once the table had been cleaned and sanitized, I began vacuuming the carpet and mopping the tiled entryway, and wiping down the kitchen. I hadn't obviously said it out loud, but I was wiping, suctioning, and spraying away any evidence of the crime, visible or not. I had no plans on what to do with the head. I wouldn't have just thrown it away and had no means to efficiently destroy it. Also, if we were only a few moments away from having police kick in our door, I didn't want to worsen the situation by further mutilating the poor woman. The apartment looked cleaner than it ever had, which I, in my paranoid state, found to be suspicious. Two guys living together wouldn't have kept such a clean apartment under normal circumstances, even if it were sparsely decorated. I was about to toss around some things and make it look a bit messier when my brother spoke up for the first time in almost an hour.
Hey, how did your date go last night?
I went over to him and asked what he meant. I hadn't had a date last night. I had worked and gotten off fairly late, so I just laid in bed and watched clips on YouTube. He then said that late last night, around 2 a.m, he had been sleepwalking, but I woke him up mid-stride, telling him that I matched with a girl on the dating app and was going out to meet her. He said he had apologized for waking me, but I waved it away, saying that my awakening had obviously worked out in my favor. I had apparently left, bringing with me a bottle of booze, and he had gone to sleep on the couch, wanting to wait there for me to make sure I came home safely. I did, a few hours later, dropping something on the table as I drunkenly stumbled past him. Something covered with a cloth. He didn't pay any attention to it at first and went back to sleep, but a strange smell woke him up shortly after, which he identified as coming from the object I dropped. He lifted the cloth, saw the thing, and had sat there on the couch in shock for quite some time, until I entered later in the morning. I didn't want to believe him, didn't remember any of what he had admitted, but my hand had autonomously withdrawn my phone from my pocket, unlocked it, and I opened the dating app. There in my match history was a girl whose appearance matched that of the head, and I saw in our messages that we had agreed to meet, and she had asked me to bring along alcohol. The last message ended with me saying, "Alright, on my way," at 2:23 a.m. In a panic, I unmatched her, cleared my match history, uninstalled the app, and wiped all of its locked data from my phone's memory. And still, I recalled nothing of the actual date. And after dashing away to my room, found no evidence of having met the girl. No blood-splattered clothing, no weapon with which I could have separated her head from her body. I ran out to my car and found no evidence there either. Not even droplets of blood leading up the stairs to our apartment. When I came back inside, my brother had his phone to his ear. My heart sank at the sight. I was sure that he was turning me in. I waited for him to end the call, tears forming in my eyes as he spoke to the other person on the other line. When he'd finished, I exploded with apologies, saying that I honestly didn't remember why I'd done it. He somberly nodded and embraced me with a hug. I asked when they would arrive, they being the police, and he gently pushed me away, saying that he hadn't called the police on his own brother. He had called our father, who I then learned had also walked around in his sleep around our age. Apparently sleepwalking can run in a family, and one of its triggers is intoxication. My brother had called my father and told him of my crime. I listened with mounting horror as my brother explained that he had caught my father under similar circumstances when he was a kid, and my father had begged my brother not to tell me or my mom. My brother had lived with a secret, ever loyal to our dad, who had otherwise been a kind, peaceful man. When my brother started sleepwalking, he feared he would do something similar. But apparently the nocturnal predilection for violence hadn't been imparted to him. This propensity, we learned this morning, had evidently been passed on to me. It's been hours since this dark revelation, and I've yet to find anything on the news in my area about a recently missing girl, headless or otherwise. As you may have noticed, I haven't provided any information relating to our identities or location. As my father shared with my brother, I've shared this tale of my dark secret with you. I don't expect you to keep this to yourselves, and I suppose you can see this as a sort of confession, albeit one that isn't sufficient evidence to incriminate me. I don't plan to murder again. It's obviously not something I consciously want. But I'm a man with needs, 2 of those being sleep and companionship. When those desires combine, I don't believe I should be held completely responsible for any trouble that arises, just as I wouldn't hold my brother responsible for a broken picture or toppled vase. It would seem that while in my somnambulistic state, I'm fairly competent at covering my tracks. Some people inherit a predisposition towards certain behaviors. I suppose I shouldn't be too ashamed of what I've inherited. It's not like I asked to be this way.